as many of you have heard, the Queen has passed away. Her link between this world and the next has finally wavered thin. The cable that held together the last century and this one is now gone. It has snapped. It has frayed on all ends, and she has gone into the great abyss. I personally don't have too many feelings on the royal family. They could have done good things. They decided really not to. But that really goes for a lot of rich people and powerful people anyways. I'm not British, so I don't necessarily know too much about the relations that they had to your average person, and at this moment in time I don't really care to look into it, because this isn't a video about just the Queen, right? Or the royal family necessarily. Yeah, not Queen B, Queen E, actually. It's quite curious. With that being said, I wanted to talk about someone super interesting today. I wanted to do a little bit of what we call in the business a wellness check. We're going to be doing a wellness check on somebody, and it's connected to this. It's going to be Charlie Kirk. So we haven't spoken about Charlie on this stream for a little while. We haven't spoken about Charlie on the channel for a little while. There's no real need to talk about him too much. I mentioned CPAC and I mentioned PPUSA every now and again, but rarely Charlie necessarily. But I want to show you guys a little something because I got knocked up the side of my head. And I got reminded that Charlie even exists because of this wacky little tweet that he made the other day. The trans agenda is being used to condition people to eventually merge with a machine and abandon their humanity. When I first saw this, I kid you not, I thought it was a meme. I thought it was one of those funny meme accounts that like say something that the real person would, but as like a haha funny and over exaggerated like parody of it. But then I saw the check mark and I was like, wait a second, that's actually Charlie Kirk. And then I clicked on the account and I'm like, that's really unironically Charlie Kirk. This is something he actually believes. He unironically believes that we are going to live in the Warhammer world where we give all hail the, maybe he saw the recent crypto bros talking about how much they love AI and would love to live in the AI world or something along those lines. I'm not sure. The trans agenda just got upgraded. The trans agenda is now on the mainframe. It's surfing the web. It's wild stuff that's going on. I did not know there was, 2077, here we come. Yeah, the trans update. Are you ready for the download, everyone? Which is quite curious to me still. I personally don't think that I'm as different to a woman as I am to a laptop. But once again, that's me, not Charlie Kirk. I'm not in his world. I don't know what he sees. He's a wacky little boy. But we could talk about this, but there's so many other things that we could talk about. This is just the icing on top of the depraved little cake that Charlie has baked up for us today. Because one thing that he dropped the other day was a little something that I just think is, I can't describe as anything more than curious. Now, Charlie, even though his face is small, that leaves the rest of his head to be filled with many a bad idea. And every single day, Charlie astounds me with how absolutely jam-packed his brain is filled with bad ideas. Because I want to show you a little something that is related to the Queen, related to the royal family, and related to England. All right? Because as I would imagine, a red-blooded, God-fearing American like Charlie, he wouldn't have that many great feelings about the Queen, about England, about the colonies and what they did to us and things along those lines. But it seems like if you thought that, you were wildly mistaken, because Charlie has come out not only pro the British crown, but pro colonization and pro imperialism. Just take a look at this.
We have some amazing guests this hour. In fact, we're guest heavy today, and it's because the news warrants it. We have Bruce Gilley, who's a professor of political science, joining us, all about British colonialism, a very provocative topic that will assuredly make the media lose their mind about how British colonialism actually made the world decent, separation of powers, habeas corpus, freedom of speech, individual property rights, the respect and the dignity of the individual. Where did all those come from? The Magna Carta, the great thinkers of Edmund Burke to Shakespeare. Why is it that the world actually became more civil? Well, certain cultures are better than others. Saying that out loud is a thought crime.
Uh, so Charlie, yes, the great leaders that brought us things like the Magna Carta, civil rights, the Enlightenment, and math, Shakespeare. Like, what the hell is this guy talking about? I'm pretty sure most of Africa disagrees, Charlie. Don't worry, he'll touch on that, and we'll touch on that too. So Charlie has come out to say that not only is British colonialism and colonialism in general poo-pooed upon for incorrect reasons, but also that they are so good that without them, the world would be so much of a worse place. If all of those people wouldn't have died through colonialism, if all those people wouldn't have died of starvation, hunger, putting down civil unrest, deaths, torture, murder, slavery, all of those things, if that wouldn't have happened, then can you imagine how much worse things would have been today? It is kind of, my bad, it is completely an insane talking point that is disproven by the very fact of that of the very facts of the world that we live in today. But that does not stop Charlie from believing it anyways, which is incredible to me, because I haven't even heard anyone take the position of this before. I'm not going to lie to you. I've heard a similar position, that is, colonialism was good because to put down those bad people and they deserve to be under the boot of white people. That's what I've heard of, but not actually they benefited from colonialism and things are better today because the white man took up their white man's burden and fixed those filthy savages and gave them everything that they know and love today. But they're so mean and mad, and they're so angry at white people for fixing their shithole countries. And they always say things like white people racist. It's so sad. So he brought on some crackpot insane researcher to talk about this issue. We can go through that really quick. I just wanted to show you a little bit of this, all right? Because I promise you, if you think this is wild, it gets worse.
Welcome, everybody. Email us your thoughts, freedom@charliekirk.com, and subscribe to the Charlie Kirk Show podcast. Take out your podcast app and type in Charlie Kirk Show and subscribe.
Don't do that.
Queen Elizabeth passed away. She was a stoic, wise, and phenomenal leader in public life for 70 years. Never had a misstep, never had a scandal. She loved her country.
I don't think that's really true. Now, do I have any British people in who can talk to me about this? The whole racism scandal within that just happened like super recently, and the other royal family like leaving for Canada, like that just happened. That literally just happened. I would imagine that she had a phenomenal life. She lived on the taxpayer dime in a literal castle. I would imagine she had a phenomenal life. I would imagine, you know, that's kind of what being born with a literal silver spoon in your mouth will do to you. The idea that they didn't have scandals is wild. Wild. She was very liked. That is true. But once again, the British public is wrong about nearly everything. This is a factual thing that's been proven time and time again. Didn't she ask to use funds for poor people to heat the palace? She did that. Also, she secretly lobbied the Scottish government to make an exemption specifically for the royal family when it came to climate change. So even though other companies, peoples, and businesses had to abide by climate change rules to not produce too much CO2 to, like, you know, destroy the planet, the Queen was like, I don't give a shit about that. I'm not going to be here for much longer. Let me ride my private jet like as far and as fast as I want. And so she lobbied the Scottish government to do that secretly. There's a bunch of other stuff that she did that were scandals. The only thing is, I consider them scandals because they're a bad thing that you do when you throw around your power and your influence to do bad things and to get a one up on poor people. Charlie Kirk doesn't consider that a bad thing because that's just like the political philosophy that he just believes in. So obviously he wouldn't consider that a scandal. That he just considers that a Tuesday. But you know, for the rest of us normal human beings, that is a much different thing. I would say. And let me remind you is that we're not talking about like something in someone who's been around just like recently. The Queen was around when, and I don't even have that many like really strong opinions about the Queen. The Queen was around while British colonialism was still a thing, while African American, Middle Eastern, and other colonies around the world were still very much happening and very much destroying people's lives. This is something that was going on for a long time. Now, did she actually do it herself? Was she like, hey, I'm gonna do an apartheid in South Africa? Yeah, right? Did that happen? No, I don't think so. I don't think she did that. I don't think she had the power to do that also. But what I can tell you is what she did do is that she cheerleaded on the state from her position of power, where she could have done the exact opposite. There's a reason why people really liked Princess Diana, who criticized the role of the royal family and the throne, and especially when it came to the actual literal genocide that Britain was doing while she oversaw it. But, you know, whatever, I guess. Buckingham Palace banned ethnic minorities from office roles. This is courtier, right? This is what this word means. Banned colored immigrants or foreigners from serving in the clerical roles of the royal household until at least the late 1960s. What the hell? Even after the America's Civil Rights Act? Yeah, that's a really, really long time. Okay, whatever, I guess. In the 1960s, government administrators sought to introduce laws that would make it illegal to refuse to employ an individual on the grounds of race or ethnicity. The Queen has remained personally exempt from those equality laws for more than 4 decades. The palace was exempt from equality laws? That's not okay. That is kind of evil. It is. That's ridiculous. Anyways, moving on.
And she entered one world, and when she passed away, it was a completely different world. Her passing, of course, has basically had every single apparatchik on social media, not every single one, but a lot of the apparatchiks on social media say that she was representing a genocide.
Big fan of your work. I hope you have a great day.
Korean Mulan. Well, thank you so much for the $5. I really appreciate you. And thank you for paying the YouTube frog tax. You love it when YouTube frogs come to pay the YouTube frog tax after soaking up so much free content for so long. You know, I really appreciate that. Thank you. But all jokes aside, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. Anyways.
Has basically had every single apparatchik on social media, not every single one, but a lot of the apparatchiks on social media say that she was representing a genocidal colonialist empire, all this nonsense, which
that's true. All of that is true. All of that is true. Genocidal colonialist empire. That is true. That is those were all factual statements that someone made. Now, you can say that she didn't technically be able to do anything because she, you know, technically doesn't have power. She could have said something at the very least, but she didn't. She decided not to. She could have, you know, lobbied for it not to happen. She didn't. She decided not to. So yeah.
I think actually opens an opportunity for us to defend British colonialism. This is
that is an insane take, right? Like, before we even go any further, that is an insane position to hold. This opens, no, it doesn't. It opens you up to say, yeah, colonialism is bad. That does not open you up to say, oh, we must now defend colonialism. No, absolutely not. No, it does not. You made that up. No.
Contrarian take. This is something that you will not hear on a college campus, but I think it's time to lean in and defend our friends across the pond. And no better person to help us do this than someone who has published extensively on this topic, actually has published a piece, The Case for Colonialism, a response to my critics, by Professor Bruce Gilley, and he joins us right now. Professor, welcome to the Charlie Kirk Show.
So I'm not going to lie to you. So far, Charlie is right about one thing in particular, that if there's anybody on the planet who can help him defend the genocidal, apartheid, racist, colonialist empire that was the British Empire, it is this guy. Now, this guy is a very curious man because he has spent a lot of time defending colonialism and specifically British colonialism. And he's a very, very curious boy. I did some looking up into him, and his paper, which was, you know, in the defense of colonialism, is just like a laughing stock of like sociology and history. It is genuinely stupid. So for Charlie Kirk to bring this person on, who is probably the only person in academia right now who would agree with this position at all, says a lot. So before he even speaks, I would like to show you a little something, okay? I would like to preface the words that he is about to speak on Charlie's show with the words that he wrote in his actual article. And so I would like to show you this, which is from Current Affairs, back when Nathan J. Robinson was Pog. But he wrote this back in 2017, a quick reminder of why colonialism was bad, because apparently that's something that we actually need, which is a reminder of why colonialism was bad. You hate to see it, but you know, that's something we need at the moment. I would like to show you something. So Gilley's method of defending colonialism through a cost-benefit analysis, which is so disgusting. Can you imagine doing that to anything else? Let's see if sexually assaulting 1 million children is good or not. Let's do a cost-benefit analysis. No. This isn't something we do. We do like a we don't write a Venn diagram for this. Okay? We don't write like pros and cons down on the sheet to see which one's longer. Why in the world would you be doing this in the first place? So yes, he's min-maxing genocide. Just so you know, min-maxing genocide. What this man is, I don't want anybody to miss this, okay? Before we even read this, I don't want anybody to miss this. There is nothing different from this man and a Holocaust denier. Because depending on how, I don't want to do like a genocide Olympics here to see who suffered more. But on the case of how many people suffered, how many people died, how many people were enslaved, how many millions, billions, trillions of dollars of suffering that happened. Imagine dropping a nuke on an entire generation and all of them like slowly dying because of radiation poisoning, and then moving into the future where their children were deformed because of the genetic mishaps that happened to their genome because of the radiation that they were hit with. This is the level of depravity that this man is on. He is basically just a Holocaust denier. He is a genocide denier, and he's doing it all for the purpose of being cool, edgy, contrarian, and not wanting to feel like the bad guy for being the same color as people who did a genocide. This is wild to me. But let's take a little bit of his words before we listen to his words. Let's read a little bit of his words before we listen to some of his words, okay? In which harms of colonialism weighed against the improvements of living conditions. So how much genocide, so just so you know, what he's doing is how much genocide did they do compared to how cheap McDonald's is. How many people in the country today are able to afford a microwave versus how many people were genocided? How many people were enslaved? So that's how he's figuring out whether or not colonialism was good or bad for these countries moving into the future. Went against improvements in living conditions and better governance. So right here, better governance is wild, for the idea that better governance, you can even quantify that. It's very odd how you choose governance. And you know for a fact what he means by better governance would be more Western style governance specifically. He proposes greater business confidence as a potential benefit of the neo-colonial project. He quotes his standard of measurement. So here's how he actually determines how things were good or bad. In times and places where colonial rule had, on balance, a positive effect on training for self-governance, material well-being, labor allocation choices, and individual upward mobility, cross-cultural communication, and human dignity compared to the situation that would likely have been attained absent of British rule, then the case for colonialism is strong. Conversely, in times and places where the effects of foreign rule in these respects were on balance negative compared to the territory's likely alternative past, then colonialism is morally indefensible. Doesn't make sense. What he's saying basically is he took like an idea of what the country could have been in a mythical, magical world where colonialism didn't happen and said, this is where they would have been. And obviously, since they weren't blessed by white people to have their daughters' limbs chopped off, that means that they would have that means that they would have, been, oh my gosh, their country wouldn't even really exist. It would be horrible. It would be terrible compared to where it is now, where now there's still slave labor, but now it's making Nike shoes instead of, I don't know, just straight up picking cotton. And so he's like, how much worse could my imagined scenario versus the real scenario be? And obviously every time he imagined a scenario, he said, oh, it would have been way worse. And so that's how he came to this position. What a guy. But before we go any further, let's see what he has to say on Charlie's show.
Hi, Charlie. It's great to be here.
So, Professor, walk us through your argument, the case for colonialism. That is a thought crime to say in decent and public society today. As we remember the Queen of England and her passing, it seems appropriate to talk about the British Empire. Why is colonialism something that we should defend?
Well, for two reasons. One is because all the empirical data shows very clearly that if you were colonized, in particular if you were colonized by the British, and the longer they colonized you, and the more intensely they colonized you, the more you are likely to be democratic, developed, stable, law-abiding, and free society today. The empirical evidence is a slam dunk.
He's just saying it? Yes, he is just saying that his made-up empirical evidence is a slam dunk for things just being base. Yo, Walmart Doofenshmirtz. This is horrendous. It's horrendous. So basically what he's saying is that if they colonized you harder and they had a stronger grip on you, then things were just better in the long run, in the long run, right? And this sort of cost-benefit analysis does not make any sense, and it's actually really disgusting. People like Charlie Kirk hate the idea of utilitarianism, but now he's just kind of using it to justify why now South Africa, which is better off than some other African countries, is better simply because they were colonized so hard by the British. It's just wild.
And there's no doubt about it. And there's lots of things I put out there showing this. Nobody really debates that, but of course the critics are all from the Faculty of Film Studies. And
I'm sorry, the audio on this interview is really, really bad. I don't know why he's doing this. But Charlie is just sitting there with the noise dial going, woo! So if the audio was just like up and down and really weird, I can't do anything about it. That's on Charlie's end.
Flower design, so they don't actually have the capability to understand facts and data. But if you're on the social science side like I am, it's this dirty secret. We all know this, but nobody's allowed to admit it because, as you say, that's a thought crime on campus. The second,
it's really cringe. So this guy is like super fucking cringe. He's watched enough like epic I drowned this SJW's hamster, watch her get triggered and cry video episode number 652. And he's speed running getting fired. So I basically lied about all this shit, and nobody debates about whether I'm wrong. So basically they're all busy making flower designs with Indians while I'm busy in the lab. It's okay.
And reason is not just was it good, but the people knew it was good, and it was legitimate. And the reason colonialism, especially British colonialism, survived and thrived as long as it did is because it was essentially carried out by the colonized, not by the British. There were a few white guys hanging around, but most of the colonial police, officials, legislators, judges were the people in the colonies themselves, and they knew from their own pasts that life had got immeasurably better once the British arrived. And the tragedy, of course, is it got immeasurably worse as soon as the British left.
Insane talking point. So now, in places that were colonized, there were people who were in power who were from those countries who then enforced the state and enforced like the crown and the colonized in the colonization. That is true. That did happen. Why? Why though? Why were there Jewish collaborators in Nazi Germany? Why? I don't know. Why were there why were there slaves who were tasked with watching to make sure that other slaves didn't run away from the plantation? Why? Well, to maintain any sort of power that you can have in a situation that's so dire and that's so bad. I can't really blame someone too much for if the situation is you will get your limbs cut off by the British government, or you can take up a judge position where you'll get like some pay over this colonial state. I can't blame someone too much for that, for trying to get their head above water a little bit in a situation that's so horribly bad. Now, obviously, it depends on the situation, right? Like, obviously, if you don't need to and you're doing it for like money or clout, I can 100% see that. But to save your own life, I'm not sure if I can blame someone too much. These positions weren't voluntary, okay? To make sure that those people starved position wasn't necessarily voluntary. You were put in that position, and there's honestly nothing that you could really do. It is a convert or die. And so obviously some people, a lot of people did die. Millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people died because of this. Some died later. But it was a horrible situation all around. And this glossing over of this type of stuff that, oh, it was so great when they came in, but then they left, and using the example of some people took up higher positions than being literal dirt. I can't. This is horrible. This is disgusting and so intellectually bankrupt from these people.
So there is almost an incantation that exists on these campuses. Berkeley, I know that you're up at Portland State, wherever I speak, they will always revert back to colonialist rule and the massacring of indigenous people. That is not the case of the British Empire. They might be conflating it with other empires, maybe, conquests or attempts of the Portuguese or the Spanish. But the British were very benign. In fact, they did everything they possibly could to institute the rule of law, habeas corpus, respect for the individual. Tell our audience about the...
How much can you respect the individual when you overrun a country, you kill their leaders, and you use them as a gold mine? How much respect for the individual can you possibly do? How much? Genuinely, if that's the case, Charlie, why aren't we still ruled by the crown? Because I promise you, like, being taxed real bad, RT being taxed real bad, is nowhere near as bad as something that, like, I don't know, let's who we gonna pick? Indian people had to go through? This is something on British colonialism. And this was talking about the article that he wrote back in 2017. Whether the article is ultimately retracted or not is its wide circulation necessitates the claims to be held to a historical scrutiny, as well as the light of current public debate over censorship and free speech. Although it may seem colonialist views are far behind us, a 2014 YouGov poll revealed that 59% of British people view the British Empire as something to be proud of. Now, once again, it is true that the British public is wrong about nearly everything. That is a factual statement and an evergreen poll that did show that the British public is indeed wrong about nearly everything under the sun. And this obviously is another thing that they are wrong about. Were countries better off being colonized? 33% of Britons say that places like India and South Africa were better off being colonized. Okay. Also, 27% wish they still had an empire. You hate to see it. Think about your country's former empire. Would you say that is more something to be proud of or be ashamed of? The UK, 32% say it's something to be proud of. 37% say, who cares? Who cares? Back to this. Such views, often tied to the nostalgia of the old imperial glory, can help shape the foreign and domestic policies of Western countries. Good old Western countries can't keep their hands off of other people's shit, can they? Gilley has helped to justify these views by getting his opinions published in a peer-reviewed journal. In his article, Gilley attempts to provide evidence which proves that colonialism was objectively beneficial to the colonized. He says historians are simply too politically correct to admit colonialism's benefits. In fact, the opposite is true. In the overwhelming majority of cases, empirical research clearly provides the facts to prove that colonialism inflicted grave political, psychological, and economic harms on the colonized. One thing that I've had to do while making this article is I've blanked out this image. Okay? what this image is, it is an image of the streets of the Bengal famine in 1943. It was the final British administered famine in India and claimed around 3 million lives when Winston Churchill asked to stop shipping desperately needed food to Bengal. He said that the Indians were to blame for their own deaths for breeding like rabbits, he said. Now, this image, I can't show you because I'm on Twitch, but this image is of the streets of Bengal. And what was there in this image was a single street lined one side to the other, the entire street, with the starving, emaciated, anorexic, and diseased bodies of Indian people from Bengal who were starved to death by the British. They were just lining the streets full of them. And 3 million people. And this is, mind you, this isn't the only famine. This was the last famine. They did multiple before this. Because what they did is they built a bunch of trains. A lot of people like Gilley try to say they built a bunch of trains, which is true. They did build a bunch of trains. But what happened is that the British didn't build trains for Indian people. They built trains to specifically suck food from India and bring it to British strongholds and to other places to be sold. They were literally taking food from the mouths of Indians, and they built an entire train system to do it. I would tell you, honestly, you may not want to look at some of these pictures. If you haven't seen them before, it is something that you need to do to understand how bad these people are. Same way you need to look at images of slavery, or look at image of the Holocaust, or look at images of, any other massive tragedy to finally get like a real understanding of what was happening. And even then, you won't really truly understand how bad it is. But you should look at some of these images. Some of them aren't too intensely graphic, but still, it's just like the inhuman ability to cause suffering that the Europeans brought to everywhere that they touched was truly remarkable. And we'll even talk about the Americas in a little bit. But even we remember how like Europe literally brought smallpox to the Americas to genocide the Native Americans. That was our vested interest to do that. That is insanity. And apparently that's good for them.
The legacy that the British Empire left and really helped develop the modern world as we know it.
Yeah. So, I mean, on the question of violence, of course, what they do is they say, well, any form of colonialism is itself evil. Therefore, every time a British policeman in Kenya arrests a thief, that's genocidal because that's violence, right? So they don't make a distinction between justified and legitimate use of
bad people doing good things is not good. It's not good. And the more bad that they, you know what? Let's do what he does. A cost benefit analysis. How many thieves did the British Empire catch versus the people they starved to death? Once again, the British Empire was massive. India, Pakistan, like 40% of Africa, the Americas, even other European countries, right? The Middle East as well, China. How many people do you think have starved to death under British rule versus them catching criminals? Because personally, even just taking in India and their numbers, I don't think they caught 30 million criminals, just to be honest.
Of force, like with a police or counter-terrorist operations, which the British had a lot of. They had a lot of that because there were a lot of elite traditionalists who liked to engage in slave raiding and plundering and enslavement of other tribes, and they didn't like the fact that the British imposed this civic institutions on these places because it basically deprived them of their traditional prerogatives. So,
the Caribbean, Jamaica, Haiti, the transatlantic slave trade. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? The British literally invented modern day racism to do more slavery. What's happening?
What the British did in these places was not only create the civic institutions, the rule of law, the property rights, the equal access to the political system.
They brought property rights. The only problem is that they made human beings property. Those were the property rights that was going on. Actually using racism to justify the invention of racism. Yeah, on top of the fact that thinking that these people needed the British to come in at all. Maybe we need to do some imperialism in Europe, bro. We need to. England is canceled. Europe is canceled until we figure out what's going on. It's canceled until we figure out what's going on. Read a little bit more. Since independence in 1960, life expectancy in the Congo has climbed steadily, around 41 years on the eve of independence to 59 in 2015. British people made life so bad. People only lived on average until they were 41. 41. And now it's something nearing a normal lifespan. Still like much less. Still like 20, 30 years less than what a human being should live. But to 59, that's much better at least. Remains low compared to other countries in the world. Under colonial rule, Congolese people declined by an estimated ranging from 3 million to 13 million between 1885 and 1908 due to widespread disease, coercive labor regime, and endemic brutality. Gilley argues that the benefits of colonialism can be observed by comparing former colonies to countries with no significant colonial history. Yet his examples of the latter erroneously includes Haiti, a French colony from 1697 to 1804, Libya, a colony of the Ottoman Empire, and Guatemala, occupied by Spain. By contrast, he neglects to mention Japan, a country that legitimately was never colonized, now boasts the third largest GDP in the world, as well as Turkey, which up until recently was widely viewed as the most successful secular country in the Muslim world. These counterexamples disprove Gilley's central thesis on non-Western countries by definition being incapable of reaching modernity without Western guidance. This guy is insane. This guy is genuinely out of his fucking mind.
On the expansion of rights, especially for minorities and women, right? They were the big beneficiaries here. But, you know, at a more fundamental level, the British created these nations. So when people say they colonized us, it's a joke, because there was no us until the British came. There were a bunch of internecine slaving feuds going on, or you were actually in the hands of another alien empire that wasn't the white man, but it was much worse. So
it's much worse. I don't know. It seems like when the white man came in, things became exponentially worse. It seemed like things were pretty bad anywhere, honestly, in the world at that point in time. But then it went bad to exponentially worse when the white man came in. Fucking insane person. What could be worse than the white man? I mean, honestly, not that much. And I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound like an insane take. It's going to sound like an insane lefty take. But I will say this, okay? Most of the world's problems today, especially geopolitically, were caused by white people, and specifically Europeans. Europeans caused most of the world's problems today. That is a fact, all right? Some people are going to get mad about it. Some people think that it's like a wacky lefty take. But if you take a genuine look at why the world is the way it is today, and why things in so many parts of the world are so torn apart, are so violent, are so brutal, are so inhospitable to human life, a lot of it is because of Europeans. It is true. And there are so many less people on planet Earth today, specifically because of Europeans. The amount of damage that a lot of other nations around the world were able to do were bad, but not on the same scale as what Europeans have been able to do to the world for their pursuit of money, power, and land. That's not saying that other nations and other empires around the world were not able to do inhuman levels of harm. Not at all. But the scale at which that harm was being done was turned to not 11, to 100 on a scale of 1 to 5 by European people. And any look of the numbers and any look of the data can prove this simply. He's just choosing not to do it because he is intellectually dishonest and giga racist as well. He is also very, very racist as well. He said that he that English people came in, created these nations. To an extent, it's true. The sense of they drew those ugly ass, weird ass lines that we now know African and other like Central and South American countries are today. That is true. They did draw those lines. But the reason why there's so much strife and problem is because they had no care for why the lines were being drawn outside of, I want this, you can have that, and I want as much money as possible. They were cutting tribes in half. They were cutting ethnic groups in half. They were cutting peoples and families in half, and then literally cutting them in half when they came in to commit mass genocide. Okay? So some people can say, but like the African people, they like accept the lines. Yeah, because there's nothing they can do now. It's been it's been decades, centuries in some instances where these have been the lines. It's not possible to change them anymore. They've changed the course of history to the point where it is impossible to mend things in a suitable way. If these countries were able to grow naturally, if they were able to build borders naturally, even Europe, even like, damn, today, European borders are still changing. European borders have been changing naturally, ebbs and flows, or naturally. They've been moving without much outside influence from the continent for hundreds, thousands of years. Obviously, war and everything and ethnic groups moving and changing and can change things. But the way in which they were put together from way back to today, it is nowhere near the same as how African people had to deal with that. Because when lines need to be drawn, most likely they were drawn on geographic or ethnic lines.
When people say they colonized us, it's not correct. They colonized a territory and created you as a nation. And places like Kenya and Nigeria are Kenya and Nigeria because the British were there.
So a counter argument people would say is that we can't even have a conversation, and you kind of alluded to this, to the fruits of benign or benevolent colonialism, because colonialism itself is an act of aggression. This is such a sloppy argument because
invading a country and taking over their land and killing their leaders and imposing your own law and stealing their resources and killing their people and cutting off their children's limbs. Saying that's bad in and of itself, that's a sloppy argument. The only thing sloppy here is the last remnants of your brain matter sloshing around in your head, bumping against each other and producing the smallest amount of electrical signals to make anything that any human being would barely call an intelligible argument.
It ignores the fact that every major power prior to the British Empire tried to become an empire themselves. I mean, this was the goal. This was the ambition. This was in.
That's bad. Just because one person was able to do it the worst does not mean that means that they get credit.
The kind of muscle memory of leaders from Alexander the Great to Julius Caesar.
All
it's
of that
what
was
you
bad.
did. You conquered lands and you tried to benefit.
It's what you did. You conquered lands, you raped people, you took slaves, you murdered people. That's how it works. Like, that's bad. Bad. Don't do that.
The motherland, but Britain went about it a different way, where they said, okay, we're going to build an empire, but there is a through line here where we're going to try to respect local traditions, but also bring in a philosophy and a thought process that actually might improve these parts of the world. Can you talk about how, these people that say, colonialism is awful and terrible, it's the same sort of sloppy argument that they use towards slavery, where they ignore that every terrible. It's the same sort of sloppy argument that they use towards slavery, where they ignore that every single mass power prior to the British Empire participated in much more brutal colonialism than them, but it was the British Empire that actually changed it. Please elaborate on that.
This is insanity to me. But this is the same low IQ argument that conservatives always like to say. Since they don't have any real arguments to defend what actually happened, what they try to say is they try to make up arguments that other people have made and then gesture at imagined hypocrisy of why that's bad, because they want to say that people think that the transatlantic slave trade was the only time that slavery ever happened, and that English people created slavery. Poof, out of nowhere. Suddenly, slavery exists. Who could have seen it coming? Nobody said this is true. Nobody said this is real. I have never seen a single person say this in my entire life. But they're still going to run with it anyways because it's an easy argument to try to debunk because nobody's making it in the first place.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, slavery and empire are the norm in human history.
Yes.
And every society, especially African societies, were endemic for being slaving and empire building. I mean,
now, I wonder if he feels the same way about the Holocaust. You ever think that he'll have a massive change of heart when it comes to like the Holocaust? Do you think that this guy would be like, well, Hitler was bad. I mean, like, everyone was anti-Semitic back in the day. What are you saying? Well, I mean, everybody had a couple of like anti-Semitic views back then. That was kind of the norm. I mean, Jewish people were always oppressed. Come on. I wouldn't put it past him. I don't know. Like, you're right. It's kind of hard to parody these people anymore. To think that we shouldn't be mad at like Nazi Germany because everybody was a little anti-Semitic back then. Everyone did a couple of hate crimes back then. Come on. Cut him some slack. I can't wait for Charlie Kirk to drop his the Holocaust was actually not that bad video. I can't wait. So excited.
all of Southern Africa is basically an empire of the Bantu, who now claim that they're the indigenous peoples. It was the Bantu who kicked the Afrikaners out of South Africa, which is kind of a joke because the Bantu themselves had come in and systematically exterminated the indigenous peoples of South Africa. But they claimed they were being colonized.
Even if that's true, that's also bad. That's also bad. Yeah. Also, what happened to Zulu? Yeah. What? Wait, is he mentioning Zulu people? What about Zulu people? What about the Zulu? I remember that Zulu people are from South Africa, specifically because of that one meme British rap where he was like, I want to colonize this land, but it's full of Zulus. That's how I remember it. But anyways.
By the Afrikaners. So yes, empire and slavery are the norms in human civilization. Along come the British and to some extent the French and the Dutch in this kind of early 19th century. And what's happening is these countries themselves are starting to develop these classic liberal norms about individual rights, about property rights, about political participation, about accountability, about freedoms and whatnot. And they can't help but share those ideas with their colonies. Indeed, their argument is,
come on, India, we can't help but share our great ideas with you. Oops, another 10 million dead.
We're not racists. And the evidence that we're not racist is we think everyone can benefit from these same institutions, right? I mean, colonialism, in my mind, was the greatest anti-racist program in world history because it was.
He said it. We're not racist. This is the political ideology you come to when you build your entire world and political philosophy around people calling you ugly and racist on Twitter. But I'm not lying. This is unironically what you come to when you want to just disprove people calling you ugly and racist on Twitter. And so wants to prove so much that he's not racist. He's going to defend the transatlantic slave trade, Indian famines, the Inquisitions, the Crusades, all for simply not being white enough. You misheard it? No, you didn't. I'll play it one more time for you, just in case. Just in case people, Rwanda. Just in case people, just in case they missed it.
With their colonies. Indeed, their argument is we're not racists. And the evidence that we're not racist is we think everyone can benefit from these same institutions, right? I mean, colonialism, in my mind, was the greatest anti-racist program in world history.
The greatest anti-racism program in world history. Genuinely, literally an insane boy. The most insane boy that I've seen. And also probably the most racist. See, here's the thing, is that this guy is even more racist than like your average Nazi. Like your average like goose stepping Sikh hiling Nazi. He's more racist than them. And why do I say that? The reason is because a lot of Nazis, white supremacists, paleo conservatives, whatever fucking Christian nationalists, fascists, whatever fucking flavor of Nazi that they would like to talk about now. All of them say that things like, and we can prove this, okay? All of them say these days, the transatlantic slave trade was bad. They say things like, the British empires and other empires were bad. But the reason why they say them is not because of like a normal human reason of causing suffering for other human beings is bad. They say it's bad for the same reason why racist people back in early America thought that slavery was bad, because it brings too many blacks and Hispanics and Chinese people into America. That's why. That's why. And so even if they got what they wanted, because we remember anybody who's like studied or gone through school even for like American history will know that there was a lot of belly aching about bringing too many black people into America. And there are a lot of things about how people were scared that black people were going to make an uprising because they were like kept as slaves all the time. And even a big thing that did this was slave uprisings in Jamaica and Haiti as well. Even at least in literal Nazi ideology and neo-Nazi ideology these days, they don't even support colonization. It's for bad reasons, but they don't even do it. This guy has gotten so racist, he's now out-racisming Nazis. And there's a reason why I tell you that his ideology is morally equivalent, and in some respects even worse than Holocaust denial. He is genuinely, this is probably some of the worst, most disgusting thing that I've actually had to play for you guys on stream.
Because it was the first time any empire said, we think everybody has the potential to benefit from the excellent institutions we've developed. So the kind of dilemma of colonialism was, it was essentially a self-liquidating enterprise, is that once you start spreading those ideas and those institutions, it's going to be natural that those people are going to start taking an interest in their own self-government. Well, that was the plan all along. And that's what happened in this country.
That's the plan all along. Them seeking independence and revolting against us. It was all planned, because once we enslave them and genocide them and rape, murder, and torture them, then they'll realize that rape, murder, and torture is bad, and then they'll want to stop us, and then they'll be liberal, and then we can sell them iPhones, and it's all great. What's happening? It was just a prank. It was a social experiment. Yeah, dude. Colonization, it was a social experiment, bro. Come on. Come on. This is what I want to leave you off with, okay? So something for you to think about. Bruce Gilley says he's making the case for colonialism to rescue Western colonial history's bad name, but he restricts the examination to the early 19th and mid 20th century. He does so because if he were to include the first 300 years of colonialism, so when we talk about like India or other like modern like African countries, that's like old colonialism. New colonialism goes all the way back to things, and that's why he doesn't talk about like the transatlantic slave trade, because that happens before the time frame that he was measuring for how good colonialism is. So he literally just excludes hundreds of years of genocide and death, simply because it's a bad look. If he was to include the first 300 years of Western colonialism, i.e. the majority, it would be almost impossible to mount any kind of case for the endeavor benefiting indigenous populations. The civilizations of the Americas were exterminated by colonialism through disease, displacement, and resource depletion, one-sided warfare, and outright massacre, and the population suffered a catastrophic collapse. And so I haven't showed you guys any of this like research before, but I wanted to show you this now. And it is very sad. I will tell you, none of it's graphic, but it is very sad to think of. This is a paper that goes over specifically how many people were here before Columbus. A very interesting question that we don't have a solid answer for. They killed so many people and did it so quickly that we have no clue of their names, their faces, who they were, cultures, ideas, thoughts, entire family lines, everything gone. Everything just wiped off the face of the earth. I want to show you something. So they were doing calculations to figure out how many people were actually here before Columbus came. By Dubin's calculations, this means an estimated 9.8 million and 12 million Native Americans once inhabited what we know as the United States and Canada. For the hemisphere, he estimated for the 1492 population to be 90 million to 112 million. And then critics gave it different populations, different ideas about how many people could be here, but we have no clue. How close will scholars ever come to the real numbers? A recent effort by geographer William Denevan to reconcile how many conflicting estimates by using the best findings of various scholars concludes that 54 million people inhabited the Americas in 1492, including 3.8 million above the Rio Grande. But how meaningful are these numbers in question? We're not sure. Some people said that this could even be off by 30 to 50%. So we could be, when we say like a couple, like this amount from 50 million to 100 million, it could be off by 30, 50%. We have no clue. That's hundreds of millions. That's tens of millions of people just gone. But the really important thing that I want to show you here is this last bit here. Even if the absolute total is forever unknowable, there are other numbers that tell a haunting tale. In the 1960s, a Berkeley geographer cited evidence in the 1496 census of Columbus's brother, Bartholomew, ordered taxes for the purposes of Hispaniola. The Spanish counted 1.1 million Native Americans. Once again, when they say Indians, what they mean is Native Americans, but back then obviously it was Indians. Since that, some covered only Hispaniola. Spanish controlled half of the excluded children. So they concluded that 3 million Native Americans once inhabited the island, but a generation after 1492, a Spanish resident reported Hispaniola's Native American population had shrunk below 11,000. The island's collapse was only a preview. By 1650, records suggest that only 6 million Native Americans remained in all of North America, South America, and the Caribbean. So we went from between 54 million and 100 million to 11,000 and 6 million. 11,000. This is people. It's hard for some people to grasp some of the extent of how bad these things are. And a lot of our education doesn't teach us how bad some of this stuff is. But when we talk about colonization, it's not always a meme. It's not a meme, you know. And these types of people come out of the woodworks to keep defending stuff like this. People in those polls keep defending stuff like this. They talk about how great these old empires are because they love the power they have over other people, but what they were able to do. They love the idea of how great things were in the past. Can I get the source, please? Sure, I'll put in the video description, but I'll give you this now. Oh. No. Okay, it's fine. Pog. And people like Gilley and people like Kirk are spending time trying to wipe away the deaths of hundreds of millions of people, right? We talk about things like the Holocaust because they're so close to us, but we forget about what we did in the past to bring us to where we are today in the future. And that's something that we cannot forget. These people are something that we cannot forget. When the English, the Spanish, French, when they came, they didn't even care to learn any of their names, to know who they were. Just wipe them off the face of the earth because they didn't serve the purpose of making money and gaining them power. And so because of that, there's so much we'll never know about history, what came before us, any of these people, simply in the pursuit of cash and power. And this is something that Charlie defends. He's standing on hundreds of millions of bodies and trying to yell down at you to say that, how dare you say that he's racist for saying that it was a perfectly fine thing to do. It was benign and benevolent for all those people to die. I'll never accept that. And you should neither.